If reaction really is the test bed that dictates what releases get made into Ultimates, then when it comes time to get Showa, oh, God help us all. I recently had an exchange with some folks on Discord who were wondering if Super 7 would dive into some of the underrepresented Toho kaiju that have never really been made into articulated action figures before. I made the comment that if people want an Ultimates Mogera 57, that I hope that they show up and buy the reaction Mogera 57, and this was met with a little bit of resistance from folks who either don't want the reaction figure, don't like the aesthetic of the reaction, or just decide that it's not worth the money to them. And right off the bat, I want to clarify that I don't think customers should be forced or feel compelled to buy figures that they don't want. You know, we've seen it with Marvel Legends before, where you have to buy figures you don't want to get the Build-A-Figure pieces that you do want. If you don't want a Mogera 57, I don't think that you should be forced to buy a Mogera 57. That being said, I wanted to make this video to talk through these companies choosing the characters that they do decide to make into action figures, and why voting with your dollar is probably the most powerful tool that you have as a customer to tell the companies what you would like to see made. When it comes to Godzilla, I don't think that there are many reliable factors that dictate what companies should make outside of looking at what customers are already buying. And that's really difficult when within the Godzilla lore or continuity, there are tons of Showa characters that haven't really gotten that treatment, and so folks are not really able to vote with their dollar if the figures haven't been made before. Folks are wanting an Ultimates Megalon, an Ultimates Titanosaurus, Ultimates King Caesar. And a lot of that is driven by the fact that we haven't gotten those highly articulated figures. And despite the burning passion that each single one of us might have for a particular character, for me it's Titanosaurus, I would die for Titanosaurus, I don't think it's fair for us to extend our wants onto the general audience to say, yeah, this is what I want and I know that everybody else wants it too. And I think that there's a Super 7 case study that we can kind of look at to talk about this phenomenon. Back in August 2022, Kyle Wadiga from Super 7 revealed at Power Morphicon that Wave 4 of Mighty Morphin Power Rangers Ultimates would feature Madame Woe, which is a villain that has never been made into an action figure before. Now, I'm not well attuned to the MMPR fanbase at all, but for a Toku property, to have a powerhouse like Hasbro behind it and supporting it, I would have thought for sure that there would have been enough fanfare from the audience to get this figure made, especially considering that there weren't any competitor products on the market. And yet, Madame Woe did not meet the minimum order quantity and was cancelled shortly after the pre-order window closed. And with that, I think there's a lot to unpack here. In a video with Veebs from the Fwoosh, well, I guess formerly, Brian Flynn revealed that in the MMPR line, the monsters just don't sell as well as the Rangers or the Zords. Now, as an outsider of MMPR, I don't know what fans think of characters like King Sphinx or Goldar or Lord Zed, but when I think about the comparable characters in Godzilla, like Anguirus or Ghidorah, like, I hold those characters very dear to me, and so I'm startled, quite frankly, to hear that fans aren't really showing up for the monsters in MMPR. And I think it's an important lesson to remember that the success of these figures don't rely just on the die-hard fans. It relies on general customers who just look at these figures and think, that is a really cool toy. Brian has said before that for each of their products, there are two main audiences, and I'll use the Toho Ultimates as an example. For Toho Ultimates, there are the Toho customers who happen to buy Ultimates, and there are the Ultimates customers that happen to buy Toho. Neither of these audiences are a slam dunk to sell to, but both of them are very, very important. And when I think about Madame Woe in this context, I think the situation becomes a little bit clearer. I don't have that affinity for characters like King Sphinx or like Lord Zed, but I look at those action figures and I think that they're exceptionally well done. They look like fun toys, and I can see myself displaying them with my Godzilla stuff and buying them like I bought the T-Rex Zord. Madame Woe? She doesn't really speak to me in that same sense. And from my perspective as a general customer, I can sort of see why other general customers might not have had that same sort of attraction to her. They also did not vibe with the Tiger Zord of that wave, with the only survivor being the White Ranger, which is a slight retool. Despite this, despite the cancellation, the next few social media posts on their Instagram and Twitter were racked with people saying, offer Madame Woe again, offer Tiger Zord, you know, I just got wave 2 in hand, if I knew it was going to be this good, I would have bought it. And each person making these comments were getting a bunch of likes and retweets, so these posts were getting traction. So when it comes to social media chatter, you have a decent number of people that are voicing their desire for these characters, but when it comes time for these items to go up for order, not that many people are showing up. And I'm not talking about just Madame Woe, I'm talking about the characters before, you know, Goldar, King Sphinx, Lord Zed. People are just not really showing up for them. Now, some folks might be inclined to say that Wave 4 failed because people got Wave 1 in hand and the quality was not really there, so they didn't really feel like going in on Wave 4. And I don't really think that that's true, because Wave 5 came out shortly after Wave 4, and that features 2 characters that have never been made before. So Madame Woe was one, now we had Bulk and Skull, who have never really had a proper action figure before, and both of those figures were able to meet MOQ. So to me, this means that people will show up for new characters if they're characters that people care about, not just showing up just because the characters have never been made before. It really feels to me as though people always say, this character has never been made before, therefore it would sell well. When nobody is really asking the question, nobody has made this before, how do we know it will sell well? Now take this example and apply it to some of Toho's more obscure characters. I would love to think that people would show up for a Titanosaurus or a Baragon, right? Like, they look like cool dinosaurs, I would hope that people show up for it. But when it comes to characters like Gabara or Kamacuras, are we really sure that the general audience is there? And if you have your hesitations, you are not alone in that.
As you said, I think it would be very difficult to get an Ultimates customer to buy enough of a Kamacuras to make it worth our time, or enough of a Gabara to make it worth our time.
Super 7 themselves, the company that prides itself on making the things that nobody else makes, they themselves are not sure about these 2 characters, and I think for good reason. Even some of the more popular characters that have gotten Monster Arts releases lately, like Gigan and Hedorah from the Showa era, those releases are still readily available in my stomping grounds here in the Canadian market, with Hedorah going on outlet deal very recently at Entertainment Earth. You might be watching this saying how you would definitely buy an Ultimates Gabara, and God knows I'm with you, brother. But this might just be our Madame Woe moment. Madame Woe was one character featured in one episode of MMPR. Gabara was one monster featured in one movie from the Showa era that it wasn't particularly beloved by the franchise. You know, I started writing notes for this video just after Christmas before the new year, and as I was doing it very recently, I got into a discussion with folks over at the Steven's Toy Reviews Discord. Steven and I kind of got into a little bit of a spit over it, and I'm sorry, I know how much it sucks to see mom and dad fighting. Amidst that, I asked a speculative question. What percentage of customers who buy Godzilla are buying Gabara? For every 100 people buying a Godzilla figure, how many of those same people are buying a Gabara figure? I thought it was a question worth talking about, and so it was really disappointing to see folks not really wanting to take it seriously, or to even have my balls busted over it a little bit later. And that's when I decided to pose the question to you, the audience. So I put this poll up just to ask, you know, with the improvements of Ultimates from Super 7 improving, as we've seen with Wave 3, and the higher articulation schemes coming, as we've seen with Minus Goji, would you buy a Gabara figure for $85 US? 52% said yes, right off the bat, $85, you've got me. 16% said that they would buy it on sale. And with the recent clearance sales and outlet deals at Entertainment Earth and Big Bad Toy Store, I could see why folks would say that. 6% said they would like to, but they don't have the space or the means. And 27% should outright no, don't want it. The comments ranged from hell yeah to fuck no. Some folks saying, I would buy a Reaction Gabara, but I don't need an Ultimates Gabara. And so you might be looking at this poll and thinking, like, it's a decent spread of answers, but there's a decent amount of support for a Gabara figure. But I think it's important to realize that for Super 7's business model, those 3 other responses that aren't a yes are a no. Super 7 needs enough people to meet minimum order quantity at that $85 price point. So we're at 52% of customers purchasing a Gabara. Is that enough? I don't know. What I do know is that 52% is enough for me to hesitate as somebody who doesn't own a company. And if you're waiting for a sale, it's probably not going to happen, because Brian has said himself that those excessive inventory blowout sales are not going to be happening in the future. And if you look at figures like the Ghost Jaga or the yellow Chitara from Thundercats, those are going for much more money on the aftermarket now. So your hope for getting a $50, $60 Gabara Ultimates on clearance way down the way, Sorry to tell you, it's not going to happen. Where a lack of competitor product and social media chatter aren't enough to really guarantee the success of an obscure character for an action figure, Super 7 relies on their reaction series. Super 7 has stated multiple times that they look at the sales of their reaction characters as a litmus test to decide what gets made into the Ultimates format. And we've seen this a lot with their music releases. Reaction figures are made in relatively lower production runs, and while I don't know an exact number because that stuff is super confidential, if I had to make a guess, I would say that there's no more than a couple thousand of each figure being made at a time, but Super 7 will make additional runs of a figure if they sell out too quickly. And there are a couple of things that make Reaction a safer bet for these obscure characters. Some of that are really intuitive in that it's a lower manufacturing cost, relatively lower price point, and so that should be straightforward as to why that's a safer bet. But the other piece of the puzzle is how popular character choices or unique molds can really carry a series or carry a line when it comes to Reaction far more than they can carry in the Ultimates line. People are more inclined to buy 4 different colorways of a Reaction figure than they are 4 colorways of an $85 Ultimates figure. As many of us know, retools and repaints are the bread and butter of toy companies, and they're sort of essential to keeping price points low for the customer. And the Reaction line is ripe for repaints and retools. As an example, at this time, there are 4 colorways of Mechagodzilla, there are 4 colorways of Jet Jaguar, there are 3 colorways of Gigan with a 4th on the way. And when you have molds that people enjoy, or colorways of those molds that people otherwise wouldn't buy, it offsets the sales of figures that don't really manage to grab the audience in the same way. Sort of like that half-transformed Mechagodzilla, which I don't think is doing particularly well in terms of sales. And just as an example, at the beginning of 2024, we have 4 existing colorways of the Shogun Godzilla mold in Reaction. By the end of 2024, we will have at least 14 colorways. And by contrast, when you look at the Shogun Rodan Reaction, which was a toy that was far more elusive than Godzilla, he's only received 2 colorways since his debut. And I believe that this is largely due to the fact that the Shogun Rodan Reaction figure just isn't selling as well as the Godzilla did. When the Godzilla first came out in 2021 in that boxed convention exclusive release, he sold out within a day, within 24 hours. By comparison, the first carded release of Rodan is still available on their website, and the boxed convention recreation of the original package, it took months for that to sell out. I would love for Rodan to get an Ultimates upgrade in the same way that Godzilla did. I just don't know if the sales are there to support it. On the other hand, the Super Shogun Mechagodzilla, which I saw people saying was an overpriced piece of plastic, that is sold through on Super 7's website. It's gone. You can get it elsewhere, but from Super 7 themselves, they've sold all their inventory. They've made their money. And because of that, I would expect a Reaction figure of that mold to go with the Rodan, to go with the Godzilla. And if that Reaction sells well, then I could see them upscaling it to an Ultimates format version as well. So to wrap things up, I really think that it's important that we check our own biases at the door when it comes to some of these characters that haven't gotten the spotlight, and really thinking critically about whether our passion for these characters is really clouding our judgment as to how well they would sell to a general audience. And if we're able to, buying things in smaller and or less expensive formats, whether it's Movie Monster Series vinyls or Super 7 Reaction figures, buying those figures and showing our support with our dollars is the most powerful means of telling these companies what we want to buy. So with that being said, what is your dream Toho character to be made? I've told you mine is Titanosaurus. I'm very curious to hear from you. Let me know in the comment section down below. Thank you all so much for watching, and I'll talk to you again soon.